husband divorced me with pre-prepared papers. When I found out I was infertile, then my sister got. My husband didn't just divorce me when he found out I carried a broken gene. He tried to erase our entire marriage with papers he'd had prepared months in advance. And then his own brother, the one person who offered me comfort, was the one who would drag me into an even darker nightmare. But that's a story for later. For now, I have to start at the beginning, on the day the storm began to form far out at sea, even while the sky above me was still perfectly blue. I, Alara, 32, was married to Liam, also 32. We lived in an old house we'd renovated together in Kennebunkport, Maine. Our home sat on a small cliff, looking directly out over the Atlantic. Every morning, the sharp, briny air of the ocean crept into every crevice, mingling with the scent of the house's old cedar wood. I used to think it was the smell of happiness, the scent of forever. Liam was the love of my life. He had eyes the color of the winter sea and a smile as warm as the rare New England autumn sun. Together, we turned that nearly ruined house into a home. I can still remember the feeling of the rough grain of the wood beneath my fingertips as we repainted the walls, the sound of the ocean whispering outside like a constant soothing soundtrack. We had everything: a deep love, a dream house, and a plan for the future. That plan included the sound of children's laughter. After over a year of trying with no success, we decided to get comprehensive genetic screening. There was a history of a rare neurological disease in my family, and I wanted to be sure everything was okay. Liam seemed supportive, but I could feel an invisible tension in his hand when he held mine. "It's just for peace of mind, honey," he'd said, his voice as dry as autumn leaves. The day we got the results, the sky was gray, and a light rain was falling. The genetic counselor's office had a cold antiseptic smell, a scent that was terrifyingly clean. I sat on the leather chair, its chill seeping through my wool sweater. The counselor spoke in a calm, measured tone, but every word was a hammer blow against my chest. I wasn't sick, but I was a carrier. Any child I conceived would have a 25% chance of developing the devastating disease. A disease that would slowly steal their movement and their memories before they ever had a chance to grow up. 25%. The number hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The drive home was silent. It was a heavy, loaded silence, completely different from the peaceful quiet we usually shared. All I could hear was the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers clearing away the rain, and the hiss of the tires on the wet pavement. Liam didn't look at me. His hands were clenched on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. I wanted him to hold me, to tell me we would get through this together. But he did nothing. That night, he said we needed to talk to his mother, Eleanor. A knot of fear tightened in my stomach. Eleanor was a formidable woman, obsessed with bloodlines and legacy. Her home, in the wealthy part of town, was always sterilely perfect, and a cloying scent of lilies hung in the air. We sat in her flawless living room, on silk-upholstered sofas I was always afraid to touch. I told her everything, my voice trembling. When I finished, Eleanor showed no sympathy. She looked at me, her eyes like chips of ice. "The Hawthorne bloodline has always been pure," she said, her voice sharp as a knife. "We cannot risk such an uncertainty. This isn't just a child, Alara. This is an heir." Liam just sat there, as silent as a marble statue. I looked at him, pleading for him to defend me, to say something. But he just stared at the floor. And then, the unthinkable happened. Liam stood up, not to protect me, but to walk into his mother's study. He returned moments later holding a thick file, bound in a dark blue leather folder. He didn't hand it to me. He placed it on the mahogany coffee table with a dry, final thud that echoed in the silent room. "What is that, Liam?" I whispered, my throat dry and bitter with fear. He didn't answer. He just pushed the file toward me. My hands shook as I opened it. It wasn't a divorce petition. It was so much worse. It was a petition for annulment. The grounds were stated clearly: fraud. The petition alleged that I had willfully concealed my genetic defects before the marriage, deceiving him and his family. My heart stopped. But the final blow, the one that killed every last bit of love and hope inside me, was when I looked at the bottom of the last page. Liam's signature was already there, bold and clear. Next to it was the notary's seal. The date on the stamp: 3 months ago. The air was sucked from my lungs. 3 months. For 3 months, while I was agonizing over every cycle, while I was planning a nursery in my head, while I was still loving him with my whole heart, he had been preparing his escape. He wasn't waiting for a diagnosis. He was just waiting for an excuse. Eleanor looked at me, the ghost of a smile on her lips. "It's best to correct this mistake early, dear," she said, her voice sickeningly sweet. "This marriage was an error from the start. I don't remember how I left that house. I just remember stumbling out into the cold October night, the frigid air burning my lungs. The smell of rain and decaying leaves rose around me, the scent of a life that had just died. My life. The weeks that followed that fateful night were a thick fog of numbness. Papers were signed, calls were made, and my marriage was legally erased as if it had never existed. I stayed in the house on the cliff, but it was no longer a home. It was an empty shell now, where every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows, seemed to mock me. The saltwater smell I once loved now just tasted of tears. As I was sinking, a hand reached out. Not Liam's, but his brother's, Caleb. Caleb was the complete opposite of a hawthorn. While Liam and his mother were polished marble, cold and perfect, Caleb was as rough-hewn as granite. He was a carpenter, with calloused hands and a constant scent of pine wood and machine oil about him. He showed up at my door 3 days later, his face a mask of anger and shame. "Ilara, I am so sorry," he said, his voice low and steady. "What they did, it's unforgivable." Caleb became my savior. He brought over containers of hot stew, its rich flavor waking up my numb taste buds. He sat with me for hours, saying nothing, his solid presence alone keeping the walls from caving in. He helped me pack my things, his hands, which built beautiful furniture, now carefully wrapping my fragile belongings. He swore when he spoke of Liam and Eleanor, his genuine rage validating my own pain. I clung to him like a drowning woman to a life raft. He was the only person in that world who saw me as a human being, not a faulty bloodline. But the second betrayal, when it came, was crueler than the first, because this time, I never saw it coming. During the final hearing to make the annulment official, Liam's lawyer presented a new argument. They claimed I was emotionally unstable, and that my supposed overreaction to the genetic news proved the marriage was a mistake from the beginning. To prove it, the lawyer began reading my own words aloud. My deepest, most private fears, the angry things I'd vented in the dead of night, my thoughts of worthlessness, words I had only spoken to one person: Caleb. I sat frozen on the hard wooden bench of the courtroom. The room began to tilt. I could feel the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. The lawyer read the exact words I had said to Caleb. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just a piece of flawed china that should have been thrown away." I looked up and met Caleb's eyes across the room, where he sat with his mother and brother. There was no sympathy there, only a cold, calculating look. And in that instant, I understood. His kindness, his comfort, it had all been a meticulously staged act. He had been recording my confessions, gathering evidence to help his brother get out of the marriage cleanly. He wasn't my savior. He was the executioner. The annulment was granted. I lost my husband, my family, and the home I had poured my sweat and love into. I was left with nothing but a heart that had been shattered twice. That's when I knew I had to leave. Kennebunkport was too small. Every corner, every wave whispered their names. I packed what was left of my life into an old suitcase and drove south to Portland, a city big enough to disappear in. The first few months were a struggle. I rented a small apartment above a bakery, waking up each morning to the sweet smell of baking bread and coffee, a stark contrast to the cold, salty air of my past. I found a job at a local pottery studio. I poured my grief into clay. I felt its cool, yielding texture under my fingers, watched it transform on the wheel. Every day I made something new out of a formless lump, and somehow I was slowly reshaping myself too. My world was no longer one of quiet living rooms and fake pleasantries. It was the loud music in the studio, the smudges of clay on my clothes, and the easy laughter of new friends who didn't care about my bloodline. And then I met Ben. He owned the small, cozy restaurant down the street. He had a kind smile and expressive eyes. The first time he looked at me, he didn't see flawed china. He just saw me. Ben was a single father to a 7-year-old girl named Lily, who had sun-streaked hair and a gap between her 2 front teeth. The first time I met Lily, she was trying to make a clay cat in my studio that looked more like a lumpy potato. I sat down and showed her how to smooth the edges. We laughed until our sides hurt. Ben and Lily entered my life gently, naturally. They didn't try to fix me. They just created a safe space for me to heal on my own. My evenings became filled with the smell of sizzling garlic from Ben's kitchen and the sound of his daughter chattering about her day at school. For the first time in a long, long time, I felt loved not for what I could provide, but simply for who I was. One summer evening, the 3 of us were walking through the park. Lily ran ahead, chasing the fireflies that blinked in the twilight. Ben took my hand, his fingers fitting perfectly between mine. "I love you, Alara," he said softly, his voice as warm as the summer air. "All of you." Watching Lily giggle as she caught a firefly in her cupped hands, feeling the warmth of Ben's hand in mine, I realized I had built a new family from the ashes. A real one. I thought my story was over, that I had found my happy ending. I was wrong. The past has a terrible way of returning, just when you think you're finally safe. For 2 years, the past was a ghost I had successfully exorcised. My life in Portland settled into a rhythm as comforting and steady as the Potter S wheel I commanded each day. Mornings were for the earthy smell of wet clay and the quiet focus of creation. Evenings were for Ben and Lily. They were the taste of home-cooked pasta, the sound of a 7-year-old's breathless stories about school, and the warm, solid feeling of Ben's arm around me as we watched movies on the couch. My world was small, safe, and filled with a love so genuine, it felt like the sun on my skin after a long, brutal winter. I had healed. The first tremor was almost unnoticeable. A call from a blocked number. I ignored it. Then another the next day. And the day after. I assumed it was a spam caller and blocked the function on my phone. Then came the email. It was from an obscure address, a jumble of letters and numbers. The subject line was a single word. Alara. My finger hovered over the delete button. A cold dread, a feeling I hadn't felt in years, trickled down my spine. Against my better judgment, I opened it. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but I need to see you. Just to talk. Please. I made a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. LL Liam." The initial was like a brand, searing a familiar pain back into my consciousness. I deleted the email, my hand trembling. I told myself it was nothing, a ghost rattling its chains from a faraway place. I didn't tell Ben. I didn't want to bring the chill of that old tomb into the warmth of our home. But Liam was persistent. A week later, as I was closing up the pottery studio for the night, a figure stepped out of the deep blue twilight. The streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows, and for a moment, I didn't recognize the man standing before me. The Liam I remembered was pristine, confident, a man who wore expensive suits like a second skin. This man was a shade of his former self. He was thinner, his expensive coat hung loosely on his frame, and his face, pale and drawn, was shadowed with a 2-day stubble. His eyes, once the color of a confident winter sea, were now cloudy and desperate. "Alara," he said, his voice raspy. "You need to leave, Liam," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking," he pleaded, taking a step forward. "Please. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't desperate." Something in his broken posture made me hesitate. This wasn't the cold, cruel man who had watched my world burn. This was someone else, a defeated man. Curiosity, a dangerous and foolish impulse, won out over my fear. 5 minutes, I conceded, crossing my arms, my keys digging into my palm. On the clock. We stood there under the hum of the streetlight, the air growing cold around us. He started with the excuses I expected. His mother had pressured him. He was young and foolish. He was obsessed with the idea of a perfect legacy. I listened, my face a mask of indifference, letting the pathetic words wash over me. It was the same weak defense of a man who had never taken responsibility for anything in his life. "I know you hate me," he continued, his voice cracking. "You have every right to. But what I did, it wasn't just about you, Alara. It was never just about you." "Oh, I know," I said, my voice dripping with ice. "It was about the Hawthorne bloodline, the precious, pure bloodline." He flinched, and then let out a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. "Pure," he repeated, the word tasting like poison in his mouth. "That's the joke, the whole thing. It's all a goddamn lie." He looked up at me, and the desperation in his eyes was so raw it was almost terrifying. "After you left," he began, his words rushing out in a torrent, "my mother found someone else for me. A suitable match. A woman from a family with a pedigree as ridiculously curated as our own. We were to be married. We were going to have the perfect heir." He paused, swallowing hard. "We started IVF. Just to be safe, to screen the embryos, to guarantee perfection, you know? That's the Hawthorne way." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "During the screening they found something. Not with her, with me." The world seemed to slow down. The hum of the streetlight grew louder in my ears. "The genetic condition, Alara," he whispered, the words barely audible. "The one you're a carrier for. The faulty gene. It's in my family. It comes from the Hawthorne side. My father had it. His father before him. They've known for generations. They've been hiding it, using their money to bury the truth, finding wives to blame when things went wrong." My mind reeled, struggling to connect the pieces. The coldness of his mother, her obsession with purity, their frantic need to push me away at the first sign of a genetic flaw. "You being a carrier, it was a godsend for them," Liam said, his voice thick with self-loathing. "It was the perfect excuse. I knew something might be wrong with me. I was terrified. When your results came back, my mother saw a way out. A way to blame you, to annul the marriage before I was ever tested, before anyone could ever find out that the great Hawthorne bloodline was tainted, broken. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't the liability. I was the scapegoat. My supposed flaw was nothing more than a convenient cover for his. The entire foundation of my heartbreak, the shame and worthlessness I had carried for so long, was built on a monstrous generational lie. "My fiancé left me, of course," Liam said hollowly. "The news is starting to leak out. My mother's world is crumbling. Our name is becoming a joke." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. I lost everything. And I realized I had thrown away the only real thing in my life. You. He took another step closer. Please, Alara, come back. You're the only one who understands. We can start over. We can adopt. We can fix this. My mother. She'll accept anything now, just to stop the scandal. He wasn't asking for my love. He was asking for an accomplice. A partner to help him rebuild his family's fraudulent empire. And I started to laugh. It wasn't a hysterical sound. It was a deep, genuine, liberating laugh that came from the very core of my being. I laughed at the absurdity, the irony, the exquisite poetic justice of it all. I laughed until tears streamed down my face. Liam stared at me, confused and hurt. What's so funny? You, I finally gasped, wiping a tear from my eye. All of this. You destroyed my life, you and your mother, to protect a lie. And now, you come back to me, asking me to help you sweep up the pieces of that same lie? Just then, a car pulled up to the curb. The headlights washed over us, and Ben got out, Lily trailing behind him. Eli! Lily shouted, running toward me. She wrapped her arms around my legs in a fierce hug. Daddy said we're having pizza for dinner. Ben walked up, his warm, steady presence a shield around me. He looked from my tear-streaked, laughing face to Liam's pale, shocked one. He didn't ask questions. He simply put his hand on the small of my back, a silent gesture of support. Liam stared at the scene before him, at me, at the loving man by my side, and at the bright, happy child hugging my knees. He saw a life he couldn't have, a family built not on bloodlines and legacies, but on simple, honest affection. He saw everything he had thrown away, and everything he could never get back. The color drained completely from his face. I looked at him one last time, the laughter gone, replaced by a calm, unshakable finality. You were right about one thing, Liam, I said, my voice clear and strong. Our marriage was based on a fraud. Yours. I have a family now. A real one. I looked down at Lily, then up at Ben, and a genuine smile spread across my face. This family isn't built on secrets. Go home, Liam, and learn to live with yours. I turned my back on him, took Lily's hand, and walked away with Ben. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. For the first time, the ghost of my past wasn't chasing me. I was leaving it behind, a pathetic, shivering figure alone in the dark. The confrontation with Liam left me feeling hollowed out, but strangely, powerfully calm. The truth, as ugly as it was, had been a cauterizing agent, burning away the last infected remnants of my old life. When I told Ben everything that night, over leftover pizza after Lily was asleep, he listened without interruption. He simply refilled my wine glass, took my hand, and when I was finished, he said, "Good. Now you know for sure that the monster was never you." His unwavering belief in me was the final seal on the vault of my past. For the first time, I felt truly, completely free. That beautiful, fragile sense of peace lasted for 3 weeks. The escalation began not with a bang, but with a quiet, insidious chill. A package arrived at the pottery studio, addressed to me. It was a large, square box, wrapped in expensive pearlescent paper with a silver bow. There was no return address. My friends at the studio gathered around, speculating excitedly that it might be a gift from a secret admirer. But as I sliced through the tape, a cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. I knew who it was from. Inside, nestled in a bed of silk, was an antique porcelain doll. It was exquisitely crafted, with unnervingly realistic glass eyes, rosy cheeks, and perfect honey-colored ringlets. It wore a Victorian-era lace dress and tiny button leather shoes. It was the most beautiful and most terrifying thing I had ever seen. Tucked into the doll's hand was a small cream-colored card, the Hawthorne family crest embossed in gold at the top. The message, written in elegant looping script, read, "Every family needs a perfect heirloom. Let's not allow a small misunderstanding to ruin ours. Eleanor." My blood ran cold. The words of the lawyer in the courtroom echoed in my head. She feels like a piece of flawed china that should have been thrown away. This wasn't a peace offering. It was a threat. A beautifully packaged piece of psychological warfare designed to remind me that she knew where I was, that she was watching, and that to her, I would always be a broken object to be either fixed or discarded. I dropped the doll back in the box as if it were venomous, a wave of nausea washing over me. That night, Ben and I threw the box into an industrial dumpster across town, but I couldn't shake the feeling of those glass eyes following me. The second wave came from Caleb. He didn't contact me. He went after Ben. He walked into Ben's restaurant on a busy Friday night, looking completely out of place in his expensive peacoat amidst the cozy, bustling atmosphere. He sat at the bar and waited until Ben had a free moment. Under the guise of a concerned third party, he launched his attack. Ben recounted the conversation to me later, his voice tight with anger. Caleb had spoken in low, concerned tones, telling Ben he was worried about me. He painted me as fragile, emotionally volatile, still deeply entangled with his brother. "Liam is a wreck without her," Caleb had said, swirling the ice in his whiskey. "He's not thinking straight. Honestly, I'm worried about what he might do. A man in your position, with a daughter, you need to be careful. The drama that follows Alara, it might not be safe. It was a masterful piece of manipulation, an attempt to poison our trust from the inside out. He was trying to frame me as the source of the danger, to isolate me by making the man I loved fear me." But Caleb had underestimated Ben. Ben, who had seen me at my most broken and never once flinched, saw the oily sheen of deceit in Caleb's eyes. He told Caleb to finish his drink and get the hell out of his restaurant, and to never come near his family again. The attempt to divide us only made our bond stronger. That night, we installed a new high-end security system in our home. Then came Liam. Having failed at direct pleading, he devolved into something far more sinister. The messages started arriving on Ben's social media accounts, from anonymous profiles. At first, they were vague and unsettling. "You think you know her? You have no idea. Some things that are broken can never be fixed." Ben blocked the accounts, but new ones would pop up a day later. The messages grew more specific, more personal, filled with details that only Liam could know. He was flaunting the intimacy we once shared, twisting it into a weapon. "She hates the smell of lavender. Did you know that? It reminds her of her grandmother's funeral." Ben was shaken, but he showed me every single message. We were a team, but the one that made me feel truly violated, the one that made me feel like a bug under a microscope, was the last one. I still remember how she loves the sound of the ocean right before a storm. "A big one is coming for you, Ben. I'd find a safe harbor if I were you." This was no longer the pathetic groveling of a broken man. This was a direct threat. The final straw came a week later. I was helping Lily with a school project at our kitchen table when my phone rang. It was Ben. His voice was strained, and I could hear the clatter of the restaurant kitchen in the background. "Alara," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "Liam is here." My heart stopped. "Is he inside? Are you okay? Call the police." "No, not inside. He cornered me in the back alley when I went to take out the trash. Just stay home. Lock the doors. I'm handling it." He hung up before I could protest. The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. I finally got a text from him. "It's over. He's gone. I'm safe. We'll talk when I get home." When Ben walked through the door an hour later, the color was gone from his face, and there was a dark smudge of grease on his cheek. He told me that Liam had been waiting for him, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He had launched into a delusional, rambling tirade, calling Ben a temporary distraction, a low-class placeholder. But then, the desperation had morphed into pure menace. "She belongs with me," Liam had snarled, backing Ben against the brick wall. "And you are in my way. You need to end this. For your own good. You have a nice little business here. A nice little girl. It would be a shame if something happened to either of them. A kitchen fire. A pest problem that gets you shut down. Accidents happen every day." Ben, bless his steady heart, hadn't backed down. He'd told Liam that if he ever came near him, Alara or Lily again, he would personally make him regret it. He pulled out his phone to call 911, and Liam, the coward he'd always been, scrambled away into the darkness. Ben had filed a police report immediately. Listening to the story, a new emotion eclipsed my fear, a cold, hard rage. They had sent me a creepy, threatening doll. They had tried to manipulate the man I loved, and now they had directly threatened his livelihood and the safety of his child. My child. They had crossed a line from which there was no return. This was no longer about my broken heart or their shattered legacy. They had brought the war to my new home, to my new family. And I was going to finish it. That night, I didn't cry. I gathered every piece of evidence. I took pictures of the doll and the note from Eleanor. I screenshotted every anonymous message Liam had sent to Ben. I had Ben's written testimony of Caleb's visit and a copy of the police report from the incident in the alley. The next morning, I called the best lawyer I could find in Portland. As I laid everything out on the lawyer's polished conference table, I felt the last of the victim in me die. The Hawthorns didn't just break my heart anymore. They had threatened my home. They had threatened my child. And for that, there would be no forgiveness. There would only be a reckoning. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah, looked over the mountain of evidence I had compiled. She read Eleanor's note, looked at the photos of the porcelain doll, scrolled through the screenshots of Liam's messages, and reviewed Ben's signed testimony and the police report. When she was done, she took off her glasses, polished them slowly, and looked at me with a mixture of professional outrage and human sympathy. "In my 20 years of practicing law," she said, her voice crisp, "I have rarely seen a case of harassment so comprehensive, so malicious, and so arrogant. They honestly believe they are above consequences." She leaned forward, a grim smile on her face. "We are going to teach them otherwise." True to her word, things moved quickly. Within 48 hours, she had secured a temporary restraining order against Liam, Eleanor, and Caleb Hawthorne. The order was comprehensive. They were prohibited from contacting me, Ben, or Lily, directly or indirectly. They were forbidden from coming within 500 yards of our home, my studio, Ben's restaurant, and Lily's school. Reading the legal document, with its cold, hard, state-enforced boundaries, felt like the first deep breath I had taken in years. It was a shield forged of ink and law. A local sheriff served them the papers. I imagined the scene with a certain grim satisfaction. The officer arriving at Eleanor's immaculate mansion, handing over the documents that legally branded them as harassers. The humiliation must have been profound. For a few weeks, an unnerving silence followed. No calls, no emails, no unnerving gifts. The quiet was so complete it was almost loud. Ben and I tried to settle back into our lives, but we were on edge, constantly checking the security cameras on our phones, jumping at unfamiliar cars on our street. The restraining order was a shield, but we knew it was only as strong as the respect the Hawthorns had for the law, which was, we suspected, very little. We were slowly beginning to relax when it happened. It was a Tuesday night, just after 11 p.m. Lily was asleep upstairs, and Ben and I were reading in the living room. His phone buzzed on the table with an alert from the security camera app. Motion detected at the front door. "Probably just a raccoon," he murmured, picking up the phone. His face went pale. He turned the screen toward me without a word. My blood turned to ice. On the grainy night vision feed, a figure was sitting on our porch steps. It was Liam. He wasn't knocking or shouting. He was just sitting there, his knees drawn up to his chest, rocking back and forth almost imperceptibly. He was staring at our front door with a terrifying, vacant intensity, as if he could will it to open through sheer obsession. The sight of his stillness was infinitely more frightening than any overt rage. It was the calm of a deeply unhinged mind. "He's just sitting there," I whispered, my voice trembling. Ben was already on his feet, his own fear eclipsed by a wave of protective fury. He moved to the door. "I'm going to—" "No," I said, grabbing his arm, my voice sharp. "You will not engage with him. That's what he wants. We do this the right way, the final way." We retreated to the kitchen, away from the front windows. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. I explained the situation to the dispatcher in a low, urgent whisper, making sure to repeat the most important fact. "There is an active restraining order against him. He is in direct violation of it." The wait for the police felt like an eternity. We watched the camera feed, our hearts pounding in unison. He didn't move. He just sat and rocked and stared. Finally, the silent, flashing blue and red lights of a patrol car washed over our street. 2 officers got out, their movements cautious and professional. They approached him. "Sir, you need to leave the property." We could hear Liam's muffled voice through the door. He sounded shockingly calm. "I just need to talk to her. It's my wife. Ilara. I'm not leaving until I speak with my wife." "Sir, this is your only warning," the officer said, his voice hardening. Through the intercom by the door, Ben's voice boomed into the night. "He is in violation of restraining order number 7B45AC. His name is Liam Hawthorne. We want him removed immediately." The effect was instantaneous. The officer's posture shifted. One of them spoke into his radio, confirming the order. "Well, Mr. Hawthorne," he said, his tone now devoid of any patience. "It seems you're not just trespassing. You're violating a court order. You need to stand up and put your hands behind your back." Liam began to protest, his voice rising in disbelief. He seemed genuinely shocked that the rules could possibly apply to him. The officers didn't hesitate. They pulled him to his feet, and the sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs was the loudest, most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a final, unbreakable seal being placed between my past and my future. Watching them lead him away, a pathetic and defeated figure, was not a moment of triumph, but of profound, bone-deep relief. The arrest was the final public nail in the Hawthorne family's coffin of secrets. The story became local news. The disgraced heir of the pure-blooded Hawthorne family, arrested for stalking his ex-wife, whom he'd had annulled over a genetic flaw he himself possessed. The public humiliation was total. Eleanor went into seclusion. Caleb reportedly moved out of state. Their carefully constructed dynasty had crumbled into dust, not from an outside force, but from its own internal rot. Months later, the quiet they left behind was no longer unsettling. It was peaceful. My life was once again filled with the simple, tangible things that brought me joy. The weight of a freshly thrown pot in my hands, the scent of garlic and basil from Ben's kitchen, the feeling of Lily's small hand tucked into mine. One afternoon, Lily and I were in the studio, her small hands covered in clay as she worked on another lumpy masterpiece. Ben stopped by on his break, leaning against the doorframe with a smile, watching us. The afternoon sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny golden sprites. Lily held up her creation, a misshapen, lopsided bowl. "It's not perfect, Eli," she said, a worried frown on her face. I took the bowl from her, turning it over in my hands. I ran my thumb over its uneven rim and smiled. "It's not supposed to be perfect, sweetie," I said, kissing the top of her clay-dusted head. "It's real. And that's so much better." Ben caught my eye from across the room, and in his gaze I saw our whole story. The Hawthorns had tried to erase me because I wasn't flawless. But here, in this beautiful, messy, real life I had built, I finally understood. I wasn't a piece of flawed china. I was a potter. I had taken the broken pieces and the raw clay of my life and shaped them into something stronger, something more resilient, something entirely my own. And it was a masterpiece.